Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our next webinar installment, hosted by our Senior Accessibility Consultant here at Nomensa, Joel Strohmeier. In today's webinar, Joel is going to introduce some common accessibility barriers across social media platforms and how to avoid them. He's also going to take a look at some of the broader inclusion and ethics considerations when working in this space. As always, please do join in the discussion in the chat. Make sure your settings are switched to panelists and attendees, and that way everyone can see your messages. And if you've got any questions, you can submit them using the Q&A function, and I'll get through as many as I can at the end. We're using auto-generated captions from Rev today. There is a chance that some of these may get a bit muddled live, just as is the nature of auto-generated captions. But we'll make sure once we upload the video onto YouTube that these are tidied up and all accurate. So yeah, without further ado, I will hand over to you, Joel.
Thank you very much, Henry. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Hoping this will be a sort of informative and interesting session for you all. And as Henry said, we're looking today specifically at accessibility for social media, and we'll look a little bit at some of the broader considerations around this space as well. A little bit about me. So as Henry's mentioned, I'm a senior accessibility consultant here at Nomensa. My background, I've worked in digital operations and digital transformation roles across the energy and sort of finance sectors. But in my much earlier days, I actually did a bit more of the marketing focused work. And I can just about remember creating some of the odd campaigns on our social channels, setting up analytics tracking and similar things, which I'm sort of drawing upon today. So if we look at the agenda for the session then, we'll start, as I often like to do, with a bit of the background context around social. We're going to look at the term accessibility, some of the definitions and what goes into accessibility considerations. There'll be a few statistics to help provide an impression of the scale of what we're talking about today. We'll then look at some of the common ways that people with disabilities are likely to interact with social content and what this means for us as people using the platforms, but also as content producers. We will be looking specifically at three key interaction modes. And these include screen reading technology, how people with low vision may interact and consume information, such as using magnification software, things around color contrast, and then we will look at deafness and cognition. So these are the sort of specific areas we'll be looking at from an accessibility perspective. And then I'll start to wrap things up with some broader thoughts around the design process and some closing ideas and considerations for you to take away with you. We hope to have a decent amount of time for questions and answers as well. So please do have a think about anything you'd like to know more about as we run through today's session. So moving into context then. If we think about how social media started, it did very much start as a means for people to connect, as obvious as that may sound. We had platforms like Friends Reunited quite a long way ago, MySpace, and then more recently even Facebook. In spite of its sort of dubious beginnings at Harvard, Facebook and these other platforms were all essentially in their early stages around individuals connecting with one another. I think something that might be interesting just to have at the back of your mind is how this may have receded into the background somewhat. To what extent is it still about individual connections? How do we actually connect with individuals on these platforms in this modern age? One of the things that got me thinking about how things may have changed and the potential reasons behind this, unlike the early days of the web, which partly due to Tim Berners-Lee and other colleagues of his and the Web Standards Project, accessibility, I would argue, was more tightly integrated with how content and interfaces were built. Whereas social media, I feel, has been a lot more of a kind of informal playground almost a bit of a kind of Wild West, to use a phrase that is maybe overused. And so we have less of a focus on standards and accessibility tightly integrated with these platforms. Now, I would argue the emphasis has shifted and that brands occupy lots of this space. Much of the content is essentially advertisements, but more than this, social media has become a huge part of the way that society does or doesn't work. And examples of this are posts on social can hold a huge importance from a political and social perspective, but it's at the collective level rather than at this kind of individual level. And I think because of this, the inherent responsibility, which should lie with publishers and organizations, hasn't been matched by the tools available within these platforms. And the other thing is that the internal processes at organizations using social media are often not rigorous enough to make the most of any accessibility features which are available as well. So there's definitely this kind of shift in terms of the way that these platforms have begun to be used and whether accessibility is being considered correctly throughout that process. One of the things that I've been interested to hear about through conversations with friends and colleagues is this idea of how social media is an extension of search. So I've been informed that, for example, Generation Z will use platforms like TikTok as much as a search engine than they will anything else. And very often, they will use this TikTok as a go-to location to gather information and to make purchases. I think this is interesting because what does it mean for how much responsibility content publishers and platforms need to take for accessibility? How should the disparity in accessibility offered between different social media platforms be considered within this idea of social media being an extension of search? Closely related to this is this idea of social media being core to modern e-commerce customer journeys. And if social plays a huge role in e-commerce sales, again, what does the impact on accessibility barriers mean for brands in terms of the commercial impact? So for anyone interested in this idea, I have another talk about the commercial aspects of accessibility, which you can find on YouTube, where we cover this idea of accessibility in the e-commerce customer journey space in more detail. I think we can kind of think about some of these shifts in the way that social media works. If social media at its best is about people, then the same is also true for accessibility. So on screen, I have a Venn diagram with digital accessibility in the middle. We then have usability, we have platform standards, and then finally, accessibility technologies in this kind of intersecting three circles that make this Venn diagram. And what I'm looking to do here is just define this term of digital accessibility before we move forward anymore. So I would define accessibility as how easy is it for someone with a disability to consume content, use products, and benefit from services. There's a big crossover with usability because essentially we are talking about how easy it is for someone to complete a task or to achieve a goal. But this may be achieved in different ways by different individuals using different interfaces. So for example, if someone is using screen reading technology or screen magnification software, or if they have a cognitive disability, this is likely to change the way that they interface with your information, but they are likely to have exactly the same goals or very similar goals. And platform standards become really important as well, because what they do is define what is the responsibility of you as a content creator versus what is the responsibility of, for example, Twitter as a platform or Facebook. And this is a theme we're going to look at in more detail today. So one of the key things I'd like you to think about as we go through this kind of session is what things might relate to usability, what things are specific consideration for accessibility technologies like screen readers, and which things lie as a responsibility for platforms like Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And all these things interacting are essentially what make up how accessible your social media content is. If we look at some statistics, So 1 billion people around the world live with some form of disability. We're looking at worldwide statistics here because, of course, social media is not locked down to any particular location, unlike some websites where you will have a very particular audience that you're targeting and maybe even restrict your sales, for example, to a certain geographic location. This is essentially not the case with social media. So we should be thinking globally when we're talking about disabilities. This equates to around 15% of the global population. And this means that the size of the opportunity or the challenge, however you kind of look at this, this topic, is huge for social media. One of the things to really bear in mind is that we have an aging population. So certainly in the West, we're seeing that life expectancy is generally trending upwards. People are living longer. And because of this, the chances of all of us developing a disability increases. So again, when we're looking at the content and the design considerations today, what we're essentially doing, if we design content accessibly today, we're designing for our future selves. So, okay, so why does all this matter to you? Well, you are a social media user. You will almost certainly be generating content, and you should be ensuring that it is accessible, and you should be aware of when it is not. It's a core part of all of our responsibilities, whether it's core to our professional role or not. One of the things we'll be looking at today is how even small adjustments in how we each consider accessibility when we post content can make a huge difference. But if you do work in this area professionally, then I certainly hope that some of today's kind of bits of information can provide you with tips that you can apply immediately in your day-to-day work. So moving forward then, one of the things to mention is that different platforms will regularly change and update their accessibility features. So this is quite essentially it's a moving goalpost. Many accessibility barriers in content are introduced at the design stage. Marketing, communications, PR teams, and anyone in that area should be practicing inclusive design and factoring in accessibility as a priority. Just to expand on some of these points a little bit more, Twitter, for example, has recently formally established an accessibility team after a certain amount of pressure from worldwide accessibility champions, essentially. One of the more notable updates that they've made is to include a more prominent alternative text feature. So this allows content producers to much more easily provide descriptions of images. And this is a huge step forward in reducing barriers for users of screen reading technology, which I've mentioned a little bit there at the outset. And we will look at this in a bit more detail. Facebook too has introduced some artificial intelligence, which guesses what alternative text should be. This is a slightly less big step. It is somewhat problematic because the artificial intelligence still produces results that are worse than human generated descriptions for images, but they are both a couple of examples of platforms starting to take accessibility a bit more seriously. And one of the key themes of this presentation is the fact that many of the accessibility issues are introduced at the design stage. This is especially true for social media in particular. And it's true for the content more than the interfaces themselves, which, as I say, the code of these interfaces are not generally under our control. Okay, so with all that kind of context in mind, we'll now move on to looking at some of the specifics around how we can design and test for accessibility issues in our day-to-day and considering them by interaction. I'm just going to have a quick bit of water. So we're going to start with screen readers. So a screen reader is a piece of software that translates on-screen information into audible announcements. It will announce content and metadata about each thing in the interface for the user. Screen readers are often used by people who are blind or who have low vision, But that's not all. People may use screen readers for other reasons. For example, some people with a cognitive or learning impairment or disability may use them too, because they make make consuming text-based information easier for that user. On screen, I'm showing a screen grab of the Twitter interface on a desktop. And I've got the voiceover screen reader running with the Twitter avatar in focus. And there is a visible output from voiceover, which reads visited link Twitter business, pinned tweet Twitter, business verified account at Twitter business 1st of Feb, discovering the moments that get Twitter buzzing. So essentially, it's showing how the different bits of the interface will have an audible announcement, and in some cases, a visible announcement as well. And it's really critical that when we're creating content, we are considering what the audible experience for users is going to be. One of the most important things to improve accessibility for screen reader users is to ensure that any images are described in the social media posts with what's known as alternative text or alt text. The vast majority of image-based content on social media, as it stands, still does not have any description, and is therefore preventing screen reader users from enjoying content and benefiting from it as well. So it's absolutely critical that this is one of the first steps people make. Now on screen, I'm showing two screen grabs from different Twitter image posts. So the first is a simple personal tweet from Nicholas Steenhout, who's an accessibility public speaker and champion. And he's sharing how he found what I'm assuming is his dog laying and having a snooze. It's a picture of his dog with the alternative text of close up of a big black dog's head. His eyes are half closed. There's a bit of white showing on his chin. One of his ears is flopped backwards, and he's laying on a brown cotton sleeping bag. The second is from an account called Cat's Dogma, and it's a joke tweet. The tweet content reads, "They're called hooves, dummy." And then there's an eye-rolling emoji. A picture is included with this tweet, which shows a leaping mountain goat. And this has text embedded within the image, which reads, the amazing feats of mountain goats. Now, the reason I have these two examples included is that in the second instance, the user is reliant on the information of a screen reader to understand the joke, but no alternative text has been included. So this kind of visual joke that has been shared will be completely lost on the user. Whereas in the first example, we have a highly descriptive and arguably emotive alternative text, which really enables someone to picture this image of the dog. So with that in mind, then, if I just distill this down a bit more, what are we saying makes good alternative text? Well, as I mentioned, it's for people who cannot see or perceive images. One thing that you can do to really help write effective alternative text is to imagine reading the social media post out to a friend over the phone. How would you describe the image? Context matters. So it's not just the image itself, but what's around it. We should be thinking about accuracy over length. And we also should avoid including picture of or image of within the description, because this is already provided by the vast majority of screen readers. And as I hope to have shown, we should certainly not shy away from conveying emotion or humor if that is the intention of the image content. One of the things to say, though, about this conveying of emotional humor, I have noticed that there's a sort of trend where people are using alternative text as a way to add an additional joke to the content itself, but in isolation. So it's almost like what we sometimes term as an Easter egg. So it's like special hidden content where the publisher or the content creator is seeing that they could add additional humor. Please avoid doing this. It's not a space to add in a new joke. It is there to convey the image itself. So that's a very short introduction to images. Another key thing to consider is the formatting of the text itself within your posts and the effect this has on screen readers. So on screen, I have a screen grab of a common social media meme in which we have a kind of clapping hand emoji, which is interspersed between words of a pithy or sort of funny statement. I'm told this is often referred to as clapping back. So now the overuse of this emoji makes for a really repetitive experience for users. So as a screen reader user, we will likely hear each of these individual emoji hands announced individually. So the experience would be something along the lines of if clapping hand emoji, y'all clapping hand emoji, don't, etc., etc. So very slow and makes for an inefficient and annoying experience, essentially. So be careful when you see some of these memes or other kind of very sort of zeitgeisty content formats, and think about what the audible experience will be. Essentially, use of icons and ASCII art, which is kind of a similar way of formatting text, should be used very sparingly for this reason. Another thing to consider is complex images and video. So it's often not possible to convey all the information that we want to in the alternative text alone. And so in this instance, we want to make sure that we provide separate text descriptions. This could be, for example, for things like graphs or infographics as complex images, or for video content itself. There's a few ways that we can do this. On Twitter, for example, we can use the thread function to add in additional information about the main post by replying to our own, the main post itself using the thread function. Another way we can do this is by including a very prominent link out to the full text transcript of the information on your website in your blog section, for example. So a little bit more on videos then. Another thing we should think about doing is providing audio descriptions. So it's even better if you can provide a whole other separate version of your video content, which includes audio description. And this is additional narration, which is woven into the video audio and describes the action on screen. There's several brands that have ensured this step is included as part of their media production process. We're generally seeing it quite often with either TV or film brands, and quite often with gaming organizations as well. And what they do is they will often include two versions of the video, one which includes this audio description content, and they will very often be thanked by their audience for reducing barriers in this way. So it is recognized quite quickly, and the effort that the brands have gone into it is not ignored. So on screen, I'm showing one example, which is a screen grab of a video tweet by Wheel of Time, which is a TV series. And underneath, they've provided a brief description of the video content using essentially just the thread functionality. And it helps to ensure that not only are they providing this description for the video content, but they're also doing it in a very obvious way. So they're helping make more visible the accessibility and inclusion considerations in their media production processes as well. Some extra checks and considerations for screen reader users. One of the key things to also factor in is making use of CamelCase on your hashtags. This ensures that each word is announced clearly by screen readers. If it's missing, then all of the words will blend into one sort of unintelligible announcement. So yeah, CamelCase for hashtags, which is the first letter of each word being capitalized. The other thing is, if your social media platform allows you to define link text, then ensure that you are avoiding vague links. So links like click here or read more are not particularly useful for screen reader users. So you should, wherever possible, provide descriptive links. And to avoid changing the look of type using special characters. For example, there are some services online that allow you to copy your text, paste it into this service, and then be provided with either a kind of script typeface or a serif typeface. When you use these features, it will affect the ability for screen readers to announce this information. The other thing is it can actually affect that content being found within the social platform search engines themselves as well. Just flicking back though to defining link text, a lot of the platforms don't allow you to define your own descriptive link text. So one of the other things you can do is you can create vanity URLs by, for example, collaborating with your development team, or often content management systems will allow you to define a much shorter, more descriptive URL for a landing page and use that within your social media content. And the other alternative is using services like Bitly, which will allow you to produce a slightly more human readable and human friendly link, but retaining your existing tracking as well. So there's a few different ways that you can kind of make your links more descriptive using different options out there online. One other thing I should also say is it's also useful to limit the total number of links you include in your social media posts as well. If keyboard only users or users of voice recognition software are interacting with your post content, then having lots of links for them to tab through or move through will also likely introduce accessibility barriers. So some of these checks that I'm kind of focusing on from a screen reader perspective also benefit some other adaptive input interactions as well. Now I'm moving on to low vision users. The first of which is reflow and magnification. So low vision users will often seek to magnify content, and they'll do this, for example, by using their browser zoom function. So on desktop, that would be pressing Command or Control and plus. But additionally, users may choose to use screen magnification software, which will increase a small portion of the screen and magnify it. And then as the user moves their mouse across the interface, this small magnified section of content will follow them around. Essentially, the platform interface itself should support these behaviors. So the platforms will also offer increased contrast settings and other related features to help low vision users. But essentially, there's not a huge amount from a content production perspective for these specific considerations, but it is useful for you to know about these users and how they might be interacting. So on the screen, I just have two screen grabs. On the left-hand side, it shows the desktop view of the Twitter entertainment section, and it's showing a little bit of information about the Venice Film Festival. On the right, I have the same page magnified up to 400%, which shows a kind of small sliver of that Venice Film Festival photo. And it also shows the content very much cropped, and the same with the left-hand side menu and the top main navigation as well. So this just shows you that the platforms themselves will have their own inbuilt ways of helping or hindering the user from a magnification perspective. With that in mind, then, what are some of the things that you as a content creator can affect and should be thinking about? Well, one of the first very key things is contrast. For everyone to be able to read text comfortably, we must ensure that the text content has sufficient contrast. So now on screen, I'm showing a screen grab from a Deliveroo tweet. It's a post about the events in Ukraine with some links to charity appeal web pages. And then underneath, we've got this big block of text. The foreground color is a kind of off-white color, and then the background is their brand teal, that a lot of you will probably be aware of. The text is embedded in the image itself. It is at a small font size, and the text is quite hard to read comfortably. Now on screen, I'm showing the same information, but on top of this, I have a tool called the Color Contrast Analyzer. This is a tool that we regularly use here at Nomensa to check designs for accessibility. And what it shows is that the foreground color, the hex color, and the background color have produced a contrast ratio of 1.9 to 1. And this is failing all of the different accessibility requirements needed to ensure that a broad range of users will be able to read this text comfortably. So essentially, a tool like the Color Contrast Analyzer is fundamental to integrate within your design process. So it should be used by designers way before anything reaches the social media platforms you're using. Now, it may very well be that you need to work with your brand team to create an accessible variant of your brand color scheme. But that effort will be well worth it, because you will then be able to move forward knowing that your color schemes will be accessible in whatever kind of platform or communication channel that you use. Another thing we see is sort of text that's on top of moving backgrounds. So maybe on top of videos, for example. So Deliveroo, again, often drops text on top of moving video. They may often use drop shadows. So in the instance on screen that I'm showing, we have a kind of Mexican food themed video post. There is a kind of drop shadow on the text, but because the text in some of the frames is sat on top of white bowls and dishes, it's still really hard to sort of discern the text itself. So this is something that we see very often on TikTok content as well, this kind of text, superimposed on moving images. This is something to be really, really careful about. And making the text larger and considering the effects on text should be treated very, very carefully. Now, another thing we need to factor in for low vision users is, which I've mentioned before actually already, is text that is embedded within images. This is very common. We have lots of posts, political posts, for example, that fall foul of this. So on screen, I have a screen grab of a post from Barack Obama, which is 2 pages with lots of text all embedded in images. This is a big issue for low vision users because when these images are zoomed in, the content becomes blurry and hard to read. So this is another key thing to be aware of. Rather than embedding lots of text in images that we know will become blurry, what we should do is include the important text within the post content itself, and then link out to a full statement in HTML on your website, for example. If you find that someone, for example, has posted information that is embedded within images, something you can do is make use of what's known as optical character recognition software, which will make will essentially speed up the process of transferring this image text back into machine readable text. So that's the kind of tip I can give you if you need to kind of retrospectively fix things. But yeah, generally try and avoid embedding text in images. And if you do, ensure that you provide alternative text that matches this, ensure that the text has good contrast, and try and make sure that it's reasonably large as well. So wrapping up that section then for low vision users, there's a few extra checks to bear in mind. Provide the important information in plain text or the main post content as well, as I've mentioned. Consider how text style affects legibility, for example, the use of textures or outlines on text. And the other key thing is to avoid communicating information via color alone. So again, this was something we saw quite a lot during COVID-19. There were lots of organizations that were posting information in graphs or bar charts and line graphs, those sorts of things, whereby the only way to differentiate between the different sections of the graphs was through, say, for example, one graph section being red and the other one being green. So there was no other way to differentiate color. This is a big barrier for people with color vision deficiencies. So again, if you are going to include these things, also consider ensuring that you either use text labels or other ways to differentiate information that's conveyed through color. So the next section we're going to look at is deafness and cognition. So for people in your audience with deafness, then captions are critical. They need to be provided with video that has audio content to ensure that this content is barrier-free. There is actually a broader benefit as well. So around 80% of captions usage isn't actually by deaf people, according to research by the BBC. So much of it will benefit a broader audience as well. So we see there's a pattern of behavior whereby people who are on a bus or other public transport who don't have headphones, for example, will make use of captions. Or, for example, maybe someone is trying to consume content and not trying to disturb their partner and so on. So the use of captions is absolutely fundamental for people consuming content who are deaf, but they also have this broader benefit that they will increase the success of your content for a broader set of users. There are different services out there. So YouTube is one of the best to create captions. There's a feature within YouTube's suite of tools that will allow you to auto-generate captions. But one of the key things to bear in mind is that these captions need to be manually checked for accuracy before they will be deemed to be compliant from an accessibility perspective. But in terms of engagement rates and reducing barriers for deaf users, captions are absolutely fundamental. One of the things to bear in mind with captions is there are two different kinds. We have closed captions, and these can be switched on or off, and then we have open or burned captions. So this is where they're kind of burned into the video content itself. We should always be looking to use closed captions. This is the kind of best practice. And the reason for this is that it allows the user to control whether they are visible on screen for them. And this is particularly important for people with cognitive or learning disabilities, for example, because captions can be very distracting for some users. So it's really important to factor in that they can be switched off by your users. Another thing from a cognitive perspective is content design itself. So how can we make the content itself easier to understand, easier to read? Well, a simple way of doing so is to use space to break up text into smaller chunks. So rather than within your post content having one big paragraph, think about, as you would very often do in web content design or emails, etc. Think about breaking things up into smaller chunks. Another thing we can do is to avoid acronyms or initialisms or any kind of industry jargon. We should definitely consider the use of flashes or other effects in video content, because this can be provide a real barrier for people with photo sensitivity. So being very careful about the effects we use in videos and the sort of transitions between frames. But essentially, if there's one way of sort of summarizing it, it's keeping things as simple as possible. So that brings us to the end of the kind of main key interaction modes and some of the key things to think about in terms of how to design and test for accessibility as producers of content within the social space. What I'm going to now do is shift onto some of the design process considerations, and then we'll move on to Q&A. So from a process perspective, what can we do to help ensure a kind of more inclusive design? Well, one of the first things to do is thinking about your team's diversity. So to give a better chance of your campaigns being more inclusive, consider the diversity of the team that you are working with. So do you have diverse voices, backgrounds, and experiences? And the reason we say this is because these will help to identify barriers and biases and other potentially exclusive issues throughout the creative design process. One of the ways to start to increase the diversity of your campaigns and the content is to actually open your social media channels up to, for example, guest contributors, and to at least ensure there is space to amplify content from a broad range of sources rather than only kind of relying on your own brand or organization's content. I should mention, though, be sure that when you're doing so, you're being fair. So you need to consider paying a fair and equal amount to these contributors and making sure that they're not being sort of undermined by the organization in the name of exposure. We've often heard, I'm sure, of stories where people have been given the opportunity to, post content on a brand's behalf, but they're not remunerated like they should be. So factor that in. Another thing is integrating checks early. I say this on quite a few of my talks, but I say it for a reason. It's really important to integrate accessibility all the way through your content commissioning and creation process. So we need to be thinking about accessibility requirements that are included in the really early briefs. So, the creative briefs that you're using internally and to external agencies. Integrate some of the things I've been saying today as early as possible. And think about things like simple checklists for your internal teams. So, for example, are your designers using that color contrast analyzer right early in the stages of the design process? Are your copywriters thinking about link text, transcripts, these sorts of things? So you can even use things like, again, artificial intelligence tools to generate text during interviews, for example. So if you're interviewing someone for content on your social media channels, AI can take a lot of the heavy lifting out of creating transcripts if you can consider these things early. But equally, again, you can brief your external agency if you use them, that during the kind of storyboarding stage or around that time that they're thinking about creating text for captions and transcripts at the same time, the effort is minimized and the efficiency is increased when these things can be done as early as possible. And it's so much harder to retrospectively do these tasks. The other thing you should think about with these processes is how well are they integrated with your policies? So you should be thinking about having an organizational policy around what sort of things you do retweet, what sort of things you are amplifying, what warnings you include if you do retweet content or repost content, especially if you can't vouch for how accessible this content you're sharing will be as well. So thinking about integrating it, as I say, within all of these different internal processes. Closely related to this, which I've seen work really well, is creating a content calendar. I imagine quite a few of you who are watching this today will have a calendar. What this does, it means that the earlier you know what type of content you're pushing out, the easier it will be for you to consider accessibility. And it is that simple. If you're kind of choosing your content quite reactively and late in the day, obviously you can see some of these tips I've mentioned today are going to be a lot harder to implement. So definitely think about how a content calendar and then some of those checklists can work together to kind of make these processes a lot more easy. Another absolutely fundamental thing that I've seen that can be quite tricky, I think, for some designers I've worked with, is thinking about the content as it will actually be seen. So very often I see design work completed on large, high definition screens when we know that the post content will be seen on smaller devices in a variety of contexts. So if someone is out using their phone, for example, on a train where the light changes as you go through tunnels, for example, what is the impact here on the contrast? And how does that affect how easy it is to see the text, for example, that's embedded in images? So it's really important to kind of not assume that your design is going to look the way that it looks if you're using a large, Apple Mac computer with a very high density display. So what I would recommend is there are some tools out there that will help you to mock up how content will actually be seen. So for example, you can upload your sort of creative content image, and it will then create a frame around it, which will mock up, for example, how the image would look as part of a LinkedIn advertisement campaign with all of the calls to action, the text formatting, and other platform-specific framing, essentially. So I definitely recommend using those tools to just sense check, actually, how will the content likely really be seen by users? The other thing is seeking feedback and using your community. So if you have a social media community already, seek feedback on designs, for example. And this could be not for social media content, but maybe for broader product or experience changes you're planning. So you can kind of start to create a community of a social media audience that will provide you feedback on your accessibility and inclusion efforts as well. The other thing to really think about is making accessibility more visible. So one of the challenges, I think, with accessibility is that it's quite often not particularly obvious to people working across different departments in your organization unless they are explicitly taught about it and trained in it. So one of the things you can do to help slightly increase the visibility of accessibility is to install extensions and plugins. So one of the tools that I have used in the preparation of today's presentation is there is a web extension that you can install, turn it on, and it will show you whether any different social media platforms images have alternative text, and it will show that visibly. So there'll be a red bar within the interface when it's lacking, or a blue bar with the alternative text shown on screen. So it's a quick way for you to get a sense of which posts by your organization or others are lacking alternative text, but it's making this a bit more visible for those people who can see that information on screen. And there are similar plugins which will highlight barriers during the design process as well. So for example, I know for sure that a Figma, for example, has a whole host of plugins which will highlight issues around contrast and the use of conveying information through color alone, through plugins that you can add in within those different design tools as well. And then the last thing is, if you're working in the kind of comms social media space, you're in a brilliant position to amplify accessibility activity within your organization as well. So make it more visible by using the existing channels that you have really good access to as well. So thank you very much for listening to that presentation. I'm just going to move into some of the closing thoughts now. So what I hope to have shown in the talk is that what might seem like small decisions on social media around formats or content types, or even the different platforms that we choose, have a huge impact on how accessible this information, this content will be. The designers and content professionals who are armed with this specific knowledge will definitely be able to make social media a better place. And I've included a nod towards the medium is the message in the title, because what I hope to have shown is that these kind of format considerations, which may seem small, have such a big impact. The other thing is that not all social channels are alike. Not all format choices are equal. So we should really consider what the different platforms offer and what the pros and cons of using different formats of information are, and what the impacts might be on users who fit within those kind of three key interaction modes I mentioned. And the other thing is the platforms themselves are still pretty slow to move. So we can all make a difference by putting pressure on them to ensure that we have the right tools to do the job as well. Thank you very much for listening. I think now we will have some time for any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. That was super useful. So many really useful tips and tricks in there. And yeah, sounds like, we can just make small changes that'll make a really big difference. We've got time for a few questions. So I see we've had a couple submitted in there now. But yeah, if you have any questions, please do submit them using the Q&A function within Zoom. Joel, I mean, you spoke earlier about, how designers should, consider that, the content they're designing isn't going to be viewed by those kind of with the kind of high definition screens that designers kind of typically have. Would you be able to kind of expand on that a bit? Like how can designers kind of test for this, and just your advice around this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So I think the key thing is, as I mentioned, is I think we can all kind of rely on our own particular setup, at work. Lots of us work from home, and we will have large sort of desktop size screens, maybe 20-inch screens or whatever it may be, or even just working on equipment that's been bought by our organization. So as I mentioned, I have no affiliation with Apple or Mac, but basically, these bits of kit that essentially flatter our designs a little bit. And we all do it. We all kind of look at things and go, okay, that's kind of the way I'm perceiving this information, or this design is kind of the way that the user will. But it's so important when we're designing for social media to kind of almost force ourselves to think that essentially we have maybe a few words to play with. These need to be nice, big and bold and very high contrast, and kind of avoid trying to include too much of the information in the self-contained image in our kind of creative content. So by this, I mean those tools I mentioned before. So that there's a few different tools which I can hopefully share following this session, which what they'll do is they'll provide a kind of a simulation of what the campaign content will look like in its alternate context. So you can switch on so that you want to see your creative within the LinkedIn advertising format, for example, or you can have it in a kind of carousel, which I believe LinkedIn still offers as well. And what this will do is it takes that image, it squeezes it down, and it also shows you the other kind of visual distractions, but also the other elements within the post itself that you have to play with. So that's really important, because I think what it does is it reminds the people involved in commissioning the content that it's not just about the image, it's about the post text above it, the kind of headline, and the other calls to action, and how all of those kind of interact with one another to create your kind of the holistic creative content itself. What we often find is that when people are thinking about the campaign, they generally tend to put all of the information into the image at first and foremost. So there's lots of text, and then you get to the platform in question and realize, oh, but there's also kind of post text that we've kind of already included in the image itself. So I think the key thing is kind of thinking about all of the different bits that you have to play with within the different platforms, and then reducing how much reliance you put on the image itself and using more of the text above the headline that you will have. And generally that will mean that you provide a better experience for low vision users, screen reader users as well. So yeah, hopefully that kind of explains it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we have a question here from Jock, who asks if a non-decorative image, such as JPEG, PNG, GIF file includes on it kind of a large amount of text. For example, the example they give here, like a long poem, is it necessary to include in alt text like the entire thing, like the entire poem? Or should kind of you just quote kind of a few lines and then link to it? Essentially, they're asking kind of how much alt text and long description is too much, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm probably going to provide a slightly annoying answer. There's no hard and fast rule, although I think there's a kind of perception sometimes because of the way that certain content management systems have truncated how much alternative text you can provide in some cases. There is a perception that there's a kind of maximum limit. In theory, it's kind of like there's different levels of what is probably best practice. My recommendation would be to, well, number one, avoid, as I've just said, avoid including, so the best thing would be to take maybe a few lines of what is the most arresting or interesting or emotive content from that poem. That goes into the image and maybe it's designed so that it's highly readable, and that gives you a kind of, that will attract your attention. Then what I would do is probably include maybe a few more lines in the post content, as I've just mentioned, and the information, within the poem itself. And then I would generally suggest that people link out to the full kind of poem transcript itself. There will be times when that, that maybe that doesn't work perfectly, but generally I think of the image as attracting attention for those people who can see that information. That's its primary kind of purpose, including kind of the information within the post content itself. And then linking out to the kind of the full transcript. And what you can do though is within the alternative text, you can call that out. So you can say information within this image, is contained within the post content, and the full information can be found, by following this link. But generally just avoiding trying to contain too much information in the poem itself. And as I say, the reason for this, not just accessibility wise, is that for all your users, if all that information is really small, it's less likely to be gathering their attention anyway. So less is more, essentially, in terms of what's embedded within the image.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we've got, I can see there's quite a few questions here just regarding the various tools that you mentioned. I think we've got quite a few questions here just on those tools. Are you able to share share a list of all kind of the tools you mentioned and that you'd recommend kind of after this? I'm sure we can tweet it out and post on our LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, unfortunately, I can't remember the exact name of the that kind of advertising contextual tool that I mentioned, but we will definitely be able to share links to those. And again, some of the other tools I mentioned, like the color contrast analyzer and some of those Figma plugins as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we have a question here which has been submitted anonymously, which asks which social channel is kind of the most forward thinking in terms of accessibility, in your opinion?
Yes, great question. I think so. This is my understanding of it. One of the reasons I'm sort of hedging my bets here is, as I say, the goalposts move very quickly. But my understanding is that LinkedIn's pretty good. They've included options to add pronouns within your profile, for example. They've had good captioning features for quite a while, and I believe, again, alternative text as well. So my understanding is that LinkedIn's pretty good. In terms of the other platforms, I think, yeah, Twitter's probably somewhere around there. I say that they're improving things as they go. And then after that, I wouldn't be able to say, to be honest. I know that during a conversation with one of our clients that one of the formats of posts, it's probably stories, but again, don't quote me on it. I think stories within Instagram just literally doesn't allow you to add alternative text. So I think the key thing is definitely, I can share a link to a page which lists out all of the accessibility features links for each of the different platforms. So that's probably going to be quite a useful resource for people as well. So you can go and check the individual options for each of those. So I'll share that.
Brilliant, thank you. We actually had a question come in on kind of asking for advice on the accessibility of stories on Instagram.
So I would say essentially the best I think you can do is include whatever is most pertinent in information within the plain text, if that is an option within the stories feature. If there's not even a plain text functionality, because I must admit I don't use them very often myself, so apologies. If there's no option to add plain text information, then it may be avoid using it, as a brand essentially, or thinking carefully about to what extent you want to use that functionality as an organization, which I know is quite a hard thing for me to say to you, but it may be that that's a bit of a no-go.
Brilliant, thanks, Joel. So our next question, which has been submitted anonymously, asks, have you got any tips for content creators on how to influence social media users' sharing practices? For example, with alt text use for images, or kind of sharing cross-platform, kind of that don't have the same accessibility capabilities. What can we do to kind of help encourage other users kind of be more accessible?
That's a really great question. I guess you could look at that through two lenses. It sounds like they're talking about on an individual level, but I'll talk about that and as an organization. I think on an individual level, I think it's about increasing the visibility of your own accessibility efforts. So one of the things I generally try and do on Facebook personally is if I share a photo of Bristol or the view from my flat or whatever it may be, I will include alt text within the plain text just underneath the image. And the reason I do this is because it increases the visibility of this idea of alt text to my friends. So it's a really small kind of nudge towards accessibility. So you can introduce these things within your own personal behavior on social media. If it's between sort of one team and another in an organization, then I think that goes back to essentially working internally to integrate checks within pre-existing internal processes, but you will need buy-in from up top. So probably the first thing you want to do is go to whoever the senior leadership is that you feel is probably most appropriate or most amenable to taking these things seriously, and saying that you have a plan to introduce accessibility consideration into pre-existing processes. And the reason is that you believe as an organization it's important that you are absolutely not blocking your audiences from content. So there's kind of two ways basically, but so increasing visibility in subtle ways and introducing it into pre-existing processes, either as an individual or within your organization essentially.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And that is just about all we've got time for in terms of Q&A. So I know there are a few more in there that are unanswered, but hopefully we've managed to kind of answer most people's questions. I'm sure if anyone had burning questions, they can contact you directly on social media, Joel.
Absolutely.
You can answer there. If not, tweet us at _r_Nomensa, and we can put you in touch with Joel there. So yeah, thank you to everyone that tuned in. We will have the recording available for you ASAP. So yeah, just keep an eye on your emails for when that pops up in your inbox. Finally, I'd like to give a quick shout out that we are hiring here at Nomensa. We've got lots of roles available, both in our studio kind of and beyond. So check out nomensa.com/careers for more info. Finally, coming up, we have Interact London, our first in-person conference since our first in-person Interact since 2019. It's taking place on 13th of October at the Natural History Museum in London. Our speaker lineup features design heavyweights from brands like Nike, Google, Goldman Sachs, Monzo, and more. So yeah, it's going to be a great event. We're down to our last few tickets, so please do grab them whilst you can. We'll be tweeting out links to that event shortly. So yeah, we'll hopefully see you then. And thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.